What is up, guys, and welcome to a brand new video. And this is my Christmas special. Merry Christmas. This video is being uploaded on Christmas Day. I do hope you're all having a very nice time. Anyway, as you can see, today I'm on my god-awful PC, and we are going to be ranking every single Grand Prix from the 2021 F1 season. As you can see, I'm actually using the template that Aarava used for his video that he did a few weeks back, because I just couldn't be bothered to make my own. The only thing is, I've changed the categories at the side. So we've got boring, not the best, decent, very exciting, and insane. So we've got all 22 races, 5 categories, and we're going to split them all. So this is kind of just a video where you guys can listen if you need to just listen to it in the background. There's not too much that you need to look at here. So yeah, let's just get on with the video. So, the first Grand Prix of the season in Bahrain, as you can see down here where the mouse is. We're not judging this in terms of the finishing order, which obviously Hamilton just beat Verstappen to the checkered flag by about 0.7 of a second, and then Bottas limped home about half a minute back afterwards. So, in terms of the actual race in Bahrain, it was a very exciting Grand Prix. So that's the first one that's going to be put into the category. First race of the season, it was an absolute banger. I seem to remember it was very, very tense, very close, the final few laps between Hamilton and Verstappen. Verstappen pitted, he tried to catch up to Hamilton. He actually overtook Hamilton on, I think, lap number 53 or a couple of laps to the end. But then Mercedes protested to the stewards to say that they thought he'd been overtaken off track. So that meant that Verstappen had to give the place back, and in the end he just seemed to run out of steam after that. So aside from that, there were lots of other battles between sort of Fernando Alonso on his return to Formula 1, Yuki Tsunoda impressing as well in his first race. Incidents such as, Mazepin spinning out on the first lap, and there was all sorts. It was a very exciting Grand Prix. So for me, Bahrain was a very exciting race. Next up on the agenda, we have Imola. If I can find it, here it is. It's down as Italy. Now, obviously, qualifying at Imola, I nearly said Monza, was very exciting as well. In the end, Hamilton took pole. Norris potentially would have got on P2, P3 if his lap hadn't exceeded track limits. And also, Sergio Perez out-qualified Max Verstappen in just his second race. So I believe, apart from when Verstappen took grid penalties earlier on, that was the only time that Perez actually out-qualified Verstappen in the whole season, sort of on track. And then Bottas was all the way down in 8th place as well, so it wasn't a good day on his side of the garage. Into the race, it was hectic. Obviously, the wet start, Leclerc spinning on the formation lap, Verstappen charging from 3rd to 1st by turn 1, forcing Hamilton across the sausage curb at Tamburello. It was a very, very eventful race. There was that huge crash between, George Russell and Valtteri Bottas as well. There was also, Hamilton going off, nearly out of the race, managing to recover it, making a pit stop and then fighting his way back through the field to second place. It was a very exciting Grand Prix again, so I'm going to put it in exactly the same place as Bahrain. I did very much enjoy the race at Imola. Next up, we have Portugal, the same finishing order as Bahrain. So this time it was Bottas who was on pole. And, well, Raikkonen had that opening lap incident with his teammate Giovinazzi where he lost his front wing. But apart from that, after the safety car went in, it was just a boring race. Red Bull left Perez out for something like 48 laps on the tyres to try and hold Hamilton up. He couldn't really do it, but to be honest, it might sound a bit harsh, some of you guys might disagree with me, but I didn't really enjoy the Portuguese Grand Prix that much. I thought it was quite disappointing. Obviously, the track itself is spectacular, but we're not basing it off how good the track is or the actual finishing order of the race. It's just how exciting the actual racing was. So round 4 then, we hopped across the Iberian border into Spain for the Spanish Grand Prix. And again, Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas was your top 3. Now then, Verstappen obviously qualified P2 after Hamilton took his centurion of poles in F1, his 100th pole in Spain. Verstappen managed to force his way into the lead down at turn 1, and then after that it was quite a slow burner. Again, Yuki Tsunoda retired the race early on within the first 10 laps. That caused a safety car, so he had some running behind Bernd Mailander. And then after that, Red Bull basically made Verstappen try and one-stop it to the end, but Mercedes came in for that second pit stop. So it was an interesting strategic element, I'll give them that, but apart from that, it wasn't the best Grand Prix. So again, pretty pretty uneventful, relatively speaking, but in the end, Hamilton obviously charged Max down, and he made the pass with a few laps to go. Then Verstappen obviously aborted, and I think he pitted for the fastest lap point. After that, we go to Monaco. Now, Monaco was a very exciting weekend. Obviously, we had Ferrari looking so quick in practice, and obviously Leclerc taking that stunning home pole. But of course, he crashed again at the end of qualifying, which not only ruined Verstappen's chances of taking back pole, but Bottas as well, potentially. And that obviously caused him to have a gearbox replacement, and there were all sorts of issues on the formation lap, which meant that in the end, Leclerc couldn't start the race. Now, in terms of the actual race, Bottas started well, but Verstappen moved to cover him off, and by turn 1, Verstappen still had the lead. In the end, of course, Bottas retired from the Grand Prix because they couldn't get the wheel off in his pit stop, and that meant it was quite plain sailing for Max Verstappen. Sainz, in the end, finishing second, so at least Ferrari got one car on the podium, and Lando Norris, in that gorgeous Gulf Racing McLaren livery, managed to finish third. Obviously, the track looked spectacular, but unfortunately, the racing wasn't. Yeah, unfortunately, you can never get the most exciting Grand Prix at Monaco because it's just a narrow circuit. As fun as it is to drive, as iconic as it is, it simply didn't produce a very good race this season. Now, after we had a few sort of not the best races, a couple of boring-ish ones after the first two, then we went to Baku for round 6, and well, that was just utter chaos. So Baku delivered as it always does. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I know we're not basing this off the finishing order, but just look at that podium: Sergio Perez, Sebastian Vettel, and Pierre Gasly. Now, of course, Leclerc managed to stick it on pole again, proving that Ferrari potentially might be back at the front of the grid, because Monaco is obviously not a power circuit. It's almost anyone can be quick there, whereas Baku obviously is a power circuit with that 2.2 kilometre start-finish straight. So it proved that Ferrari had got some decent pace. Leclerc managed to start the race this time, but he was off the podium, overtaken by Hamilton, Verstappen and Perez, all within sort of the first 7-8 laps. Then obviously Red Bull brought both cars in, and they both came out ahead of Lewis Hamilton. That obviously really frustrated the British driver. And then the rest of the race was a little bit boring after that, to take my point, but Verstappen and Perez are on target for a 1-2. Then Lance Stroll obviously had that enormous tyre failure on the pit straight. That brought out the safety car, and again Red Bull managed to keep both their drivers in 1 and 2. Meanwhile, for Mercedes, Hamilton's teammate Valtteri Bottas was all the way down right in the midfield. I mean, he wasn't given a tow. He had to give his teammate a tow in qualifying, so effectively sacrifice his performance, and in the end I think Bottas finished in something like 12th or 13th outside the points, just off the top of my head. So it was a really disappointing weekend again for Valtteri. So it was a shame in a way that he had to sacrifice himself like that, especially considering, he won the 2019 Azerbaijan Grand Prix. It probably wasn't the return to Baku that he was expecting. But then we got to sort of lap 47, lap 48, and Verstappen, from the lead of the Grand Prix, obviously has that huge tyre blowout at 210 miles per hour, straight into the tyre wall, red flagged the race. And then on the restart, you've of course got Perez and Hamilton. Hamilton initially gets the better restart after brakes smoking away on the start line, but then he something like he knocked on the magic button, which meant that he went straight on, completely missed the corner. And that was all plain sailing for Perez there, for him to be the perfect wingman, pick up any lost points for the team, and to take just his second Grand Prix victory. And in the end would only be his sole win of the season. But nevertheless, that wasn't taking away from the fact that Verstappen was going to win that race. But Perez picking up the pieces, and also a fantastic last lap scrap between Gasly, Norris and Leclerc for that final spot on the podium. And again, it was a brilliant drive for Sebastian Vettel as well. However, moving on now to the French Grand Prix. Now, this one was a very pleasant surprise. This was a very pleasant surprise. Paul Ricard, to be honest, is a circuit that I quite enjoy driving. It's not too bad of a circuit, but the races we saw in 2018 and 2019 were obviously deathly dull. Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes absolutely cruising to victory in both of those. But this weekend was different. Verstappen, to everyone's surprise, took pole on the Saturday, but then he ran a little bit wide at turn 1 on the opening lap, which gifted the lead back to Lewis Hamilton. In the end, Red Bull decided to two-stop the race, and Mercedes only one 1 stopped the race, and with just 1 lap to go, Verstappen obviously passed Hamilton into the sort of chicane in the middle sector between the 2 straights, and that meant that the Dutchman went on to take a shock win in a way at the French Grand Prix, because that was nailed on to be Mercedes territory, even if it felt like they didn't quite have the fastest car. And there was obviously that famous radio of Valtteri Bottas absolutely furious at the team, that nobody listened to him when he said that there was going to be a 2-stop race, and that potentially the team of the strategists have maybe cost them potentially not winning that race. So he was obviously very, very cross about that. So in the end, Red Bull managed to get both their cars on the podium because Perez overtook Bottas. That was their first double podium of the season. So another bit of interesting strategic element. Also, nobody retired the race. Just a random fact, that was interesting. So, to be honest, I wouldn't say it was quite very exciting, but it was a decent race. It was definitely the better end of the decent category for sure, was the French Grand Prix. So, a substantial improvement on the 2 we had in previous years before that. Next up, we have the Styrian Grand Prix. Now, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. This wasn't a very exciting race. It was just the Max Verstappen show. I'm pretty sure he led every single lap. He won by something like 38 seconds because Mercedes pitted to take the fastest lap point. There was all, the orange smoke, all that thing, he's sort of, lighting up the tyres as he crossed the line. It was definitely the Max Verstappen show, and to be honest, seems harsh, but the Styrian Grand Prix was a boring race. To be honest, it was a while ago, and I haven't watched any of the races really sort of back. I've kind of watched bits of them since the season finished, but most of this is kind of just what I remember. So, yeah, the Styrian Grand Prix wasn't the most entertaining race for sure, but Austria, again, the second Austrian Grand Prix, effectively another home race for Verstappen, because, the Dutch fans don't have to travel very far to come and watch him. This race was better. I'm going to put it in not the best. It was slightly better in the fact that obviously Norris did get his front row start this time, and in the end he managed to beat Lewis Hamilton to the podium. Bottas getting his first finish on the podium this season that wasn't 3rd place. So he always seemed to go well at the Red Bull Ring. Of course, he won the 2020 Austrian Grand Prix, and I believe he won another race at the Austrian Grand Prix, and I believe in 2017, possibly. So, yeah, Valtteri always seeming to do well at the Red Bull Ring. But, yeah, there was a safety car as well, that whole incident with Norris and Perez running out of road. George Russell into Q3 for the first time. That pleased me. I'm a bit of a George Russell fan, although I say I'm a neutral supporter. If I had to pick one, he would probably be my favourite driver. So, yeah, that was nice to see as well. And obviously Alonso taking those points away from Williams on the final stages. I'm fairly sure that was Austria. It was slightly better than the race before, but again, it wasn't anything spectacular. And now, moving on to Silverstone. Now, Silverstone, the British Grand Prix. This was an absolutely insane race, and I'm not just saying that because of the drama. It genuinely was a fantastic, entertaining race to watch. It was a proper Grand Prix. Hamilton and Verstappen, obviously wheel to wheel, nose to nose, right from the get-go, right from lights out, and then it was kind of been brewing all season long. They'd had so many wheel-to-wheel incidents, and then, bam, we get to Copse Corner. Hamilton turns into Max at about 160 miles an hour. Was it a necessary move? I don't know, but at the same time, I remember Martin Brundle saying they were critical corners for the race, that Hamilton had to get in front of Verstappen as soon as possible, because otherwise it would just be, Max Verstappen's race to lose, just like the ones in Austria had been. And obviously there's all that thing about Leclerc as well driving so well. The red flag brought out after Verstappen's incident. Hamilton being given a 10-second stop-go penalty, which meant that obviously he had to chase back up to the Ferrari, who seemed to have engine issues. It was all go. It was an entertaining, tense race. Hamilton almost trying the same move to overtake Leclerc on lap 50, so just sort of 2 laps from the end. And in the end, Lewis Hamilton returning himself in terms of the championship to give himself a fighting chance by winning the British Grand Prix, I think for the 8th time, which is phenomenal when you think about it. So, a fantastic race from Lewis Hamilton there. And now moving on to the Hungarian Grand Prix, the final race before the summer break. And again, I'm going to do it again, this was an absolutely insane race. I feel like I'm just going to end up putting half of them in either insane, very exciting, or decent, because we were treated to such a special season this year. It was incredible. The best season that I can remember. I've been watching, kind of following F1 for about sort of 7 years. So, yeah, it was definitely the best one in my time that I've been following. But the Hungarian Grand Prix, all that drama at the start of Bottas ramming into Norris, and then the side effect of knocking into both Red Bulls, Perez out the race, Verstappen with significant damage. Then there was Ricciardo, all that spinning, Stroll going into the side of Charles Leclerc. I did actually watch sort of the race start at Hungary because there was so much chaos, and there was sort of, 5-6 cars knocked out just by sort of the first lap. And then there was that incident in the pit lane where Raikkonen was released from his pit box and cut across Mazepin, and that meant Mazepin retired from the race. And obviously that iconic image of effectively, well, it probably will be iconic, I suppose, of Lewis Hamilton taking the lights out of the restart by himself, because all the other drivers pitted. And even to this day, I still don't know why Hamilton did not pit at the end of the safety car, why he did that extra lap. I mean, today we will never know, because it just looked obviously dry. The sun had come out. Everybody else had did it. Obviously, being the pioneer, he was at the front of the field. He wasn't to know that everyone else was going to do that. But even, someone with his experience, he should have probably taken the initiative to pit for dries, because even if it wasn't sort of dries immediately, it was going to be dry looking at the conditions probably within 1 or 2 laps. So to save himself, it would have been better if he'd have come in. And then obviously that race-long battle between Esteban Ocon and Sebastian Vettel as well, who in the end was disqualified after the race for a fuel irregularity. So that meant in the end Hamilton fought his way all the way back up to 3rd on the road, which eventually became 2nd after the Germans' disqualification. It was on a 2-stop race as well. It was absolutely bonkers. And there was Carlos Sainz getting another podium this season for Ferrari. And Fernando Alonso, the Spanish Minister of Defence, who, watching him, showing that he'd still lost absolutely none of his skill and that age is just a number, was absolutely fantastic. It was a great race. I really enjoyed watching the Hungarian Grand Prix. And now Belgium. Oh, well, there's only one place for Belgium to go. And that's simply because the race never happened. And George Russell got his first podium, sort of. His qualifying lap was just amazing. To be honest, I still don't know how he actually managed to pull that out of the bag, even in wet conditions where, Lewis Hamilton's a master of the wet and he was only 3rd fastest, and the fact that Russell managed to drag his tractor onto the front row is just hats off to him. So the fact that the race didn't go ahead, the fact that he was almost worthy enough of that podium just because of his qualifying lap is almost justice, to be honest. I feel like it was that good. And in the end, Verstappen was declared the winner. Perez obviously crashed on the reconnaissance lap, but again, the race never happened. Now then, the Dutch Grand Prix, Max Verstappen's home race. It's no question to say Zandvoort is an amazing circuit. The undulating sort of nature, the twisty, windy, high-speed corners. It's a fantastic circuit. All the banked corners, everything. It's a brilliant, brilliant circuit. Unfortunately, what wasn't so brilliant was the race. Now, it seems a little bit harsh to put it in boring, so I know we're just basing this off the race, but I'm kind of going to cheat myself a bit here, and I'm going to put Zandvoort in not the best. There was all that drama about Bottas taking the fastest lap, even when the team specifically didn't told him not to take it, rather. But even though he backed off in the final couple of sectors, he still got it, but it didn't matter in the end, because Hamilton, I believe, took it back with sort of the last lap or so. But also the atmosphere at that racetrack was phenomenal, and I think even if I'm not a Max fan, nor am I a Lewis fan, just making that quite clear, I still want to go back to Zandvoort and just keep going back. It should be a permanent fixture on the F1 calendar for years to come, because not only is the atmosphere incredible, but the circuit is as well. Now then, Italy, the Italian Grand Prix. There's only one place for that to go. Yep, you all guessed it. Both races in Italy were brilliant this year, which is that unusual? I don't know. Monza is always an insane race, as we saw in 2020 with Pierre Gasly winning, 2019 Charles Leclerc withstanding all that pressure, 2018 was good as well, of course, Lewis Hamilton, Sebastian Vettel tangling on the opening lap. Monza has always brought a fantastic race for several years now in a row, and it's fair to say 2021 was probably the best of the lot. Daniel Ricciardo, obviously in my season predictions I said he would initially win a race, then in the summer break I changed it to say Norris would win a race. So it was fantastic in a way to see McLaren get a 1-2 because they deserved it. You know, they really deserved to get both cars on the podium. They'd had a great car up to that point. Norris especially, you know, really standing head and shoulders above his teammate for the majority of the season. And also huge kudos to Valtteri Bottas as well, 20th up to 3rd. He charging all the way through the field. But obviously the main talking point is that image of Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton taking each other out at the first chicane after Hamilton exiting the pits. It was a slow stop for both of them, but Verstappen obviously had to fight it so hard because if the Mercedes gets in front into clean air, then it's game over. Verstappen won't be re-overtaking him, so that's why he had to do it in such a manner. So it was just an insane race. Ricciardo, of course, to jump off the start as well. It was ridiculous. Need I say any more? And now to the Russian Grand Prix. That was another insane race. I feel like I'm almost cheating myself here to make it too easy to get insane races, and well, maybe I am, or maybe it was just we have had an incredible season. It's probably a bit of both, but the Russian Grand Prix, think about the top 3 for that race: Norris, Sainz, Russell, and that was on merit in the dry. I know it rained in the first part of qualifying, but I believe by Q3 there were some lap times being set on dry tyres, but I could be wrong, so please quote me on that if I'm incorrect. But of course, the Russian Grand Prix was insane. It was a fantastic race, no question. And that really, really, really surprised me because Russia is normally, hands down, one of the worst races of the year. One of the most boring tracks of the calendar. And the fact that Russia is going in insane just epitomises how good this year has been. Obviously, all the drama unfolded at the end with all the rain and everything like that. So, Norris going wide, Hamilton pitting for Inters, Norris, no, shut up, all of that. Those famous radio messages, Verstappen getting lucky going from 6th to 2nd on the final lap or something because he pitted for the Inters after he started from the back. Sainz getting another podium. Bottas, of course, again, was absolutely nowhere, so it was unfortunate for him in a way that he was so inconsistent in a way. We'll get to the Turkish Grand Prix in a minute, but it was just a fantastic race. Again, another fantastic race, and of course, Lewis Hamilton, the first driver to reach 100 Grand Prix victories. Next up, the Turkish Grand Prix. Now, I just briefly touched on that, about Bottas's inconsistency and the fact that he didn't have a great season at all up to this point. And this is the bit where he really showed what he can do on a good day. He took pole position. Well, he inherited pole position after Hamilton had to take a grid penalty. Lewis was initially fastest on Saturday, but he just controlled the race. I believe he led every single lap, but obviously, we had all the white bulls because it was supposed to be the Japanese Grand Prix, but that was cancelled, which is why Turkey came back onto the calendar. So we had Verstappen and Perez, 2 white bulls on the podium. In the end, Hamilton was nowhere. I think he was only something like 5th or 6th, but it was a great drive from Bottas. But the actual race itself was kind of... yeah, it was kind of like Spain, to be honest, in terms of the strategic element. Do we pit for dries? Do we stay out? Vettel in the end tried it on the medium tyre, but went backwards very quickly, so that kind of went to pot for him. Yeah, the Turkish Grand Prix, unfortunately, in my opinion, was nowhere near as good as it was in 2020. Moving quickly on to the US Grand Prix. Now, some people would call this very exciting. Some people may even call it not the best. So therefore, I'm going to go in the middle. Don't get me wrong, in my opinion, the US Grand Prix was a decent race. It certainly wasn't terrible. Obviously, Verstappen and Perez apparently had no hydration system, or the hydration system was broken. I know certainly on Perez, so he said it was one of the most, physically, it was one of the most challenging races he'd ever done, because obviously he couldn't drink, which is obviously a bit of a problem. And again, just like France, the other track in decent so far, this was nailed on to be a Mercedes track, but Verstappen went and proved that theory wrong, and again, so did Perez by backing it up with another podium for the team. That was his 2nd podium in succession, and I believe his 4th of the season up to that point. So, again, it was a great drive from Max, obviously, to defend from Hamilton, to keep him behind. Again, he won by only about a second, so it was another close finish between the two of them. But the actual race itself was not bad. The track is decent. Brutally honest, I much prefer Miami, having already seen some footage of that and racing around there. I can't wait to go there next year, so if they're going to have one US Grand Prix, have it at Miami rather than COTA. But the race itself was not bad, and I'm going to stick with that. And now the Mexican Grand Prix was, again, interesting. Okay, so next, of course, we have the Mexican Grand Prix. Now, this was an interesting race. Started, of course, with a Mercedes front row lockout. Valtteri Bottas, Lewis Hamilton, ahead of the two Red Bulls, Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. Now then, into turn one, of course, the long slipstream. Max Verstappen meant that he had the slipstream of the two Mercedes, and he took the lead into turn one because it's a very long run. And Bottas, of course, was spun round by Daniel Ricciardo, and that caused a whole load of backlog. There was a crash, I think, between Tsunoda and Latifi. There was Schumacher out of the race. It was all go. And then, eventually, by the time the checkered flag fell, Max Verstappen won the race, of course. He won in Mexico City for the third time, I think. And, of course, Sergio Perez stood on the podium in his home race for the very first time, which was very nice. And, of course, to see his dad celebrating so wildly was nice as well. So, Hamilton, in the end, only just held on to second place. I feel like it could have been potentially a Red Bull 1-2 if there'd been another lap. But anyway, it was a good day for Red Bull in the office. In terms of the race itself, it was boring, to be honest. Nothing happened after lap 1. So, yeah, not much happened after lap 1. And, yeah, to be honest, it was just quite simply a plain sailing Grand Prix that involved Bottas not scoring points, not through any fault of his own again. He was caught up in the incident on lap 1. There was the Ferrari scoring quite well, Pierre Gasly finishing an impressive 4th place. He had a great season for AlphaTauri, but a 1-3 for Red Bull and 2nd place for Lewis Hamilton, pretty bog standard stuff. And then we go to Brazil. Now, some people would put this in insane. I'm going to put the race in very exciting. Because, don't forget, we had a sprint quali in Interlagos as well. Lewis Hamilton, the Friday qualifying, he took pole by around 4/10, I think. He absolutely smashed the opposition, but then was disqualified for breaching the technical regulations regarding the rear wing. So he was sent all the way to the back. In 24 laps of the sprint race, I think it was 24, he went from 20th up to 5th, which, to be honest, is just ridiculous. That is an absolute mega drive. Then, of course, he had to take the 5th-place grid penalty, which sent him back down to 10th, and then he won the race to just sum up an absolutely ridiculously insane weekend for Lewis Hamilton. And that was the weekend when I thought, okay, maybe the championship is not over yet. After Mexico, Verstappen was leading by something like 23 points. He had the biggest lead he had throughout the entire season. He had a huge lead, and to be honest, I thought it was over, especially with Brazil on the cards, and that was traditionally supposed to be a Red Bull track. So Lewis Hamilton really pulled the stops out to make sure that he won that race, because I feel like if Max had won it, that would have been championship over there and then. So the fact that Lewis won that was critical for the championship. Max could only manage P2, Bottas managing to keep P3 ahead of Sergio Perez. So a great weekend for Mercedes, a brilliant weekend for Lewis Hamilton in that regard. And again, the race was a pretty exciting one. Wheel to wheel, Hamilton, Verstappen. Once again, we'd seen it so many times in this season. Next, we have the Qatar Grand Prix. Now we're going into the Middle Eastern finale this time. So then, the Qatar Grand Prix. What did I make of this? It was decent. I'll be brutally honest. The track was in a way, I thought it was quite narrow in terms of the fact that it would be very difficult to overtake because, of course, it's never been used for F1 before. It's used mainly for MotoGP. It's a regular on the MotoGP calendar. But actually, the race was interesting. There were all that drama about the punctures and curbs involving Bottas, the two Williams cars, Russell and Latifi. Both got punctures. Yeah, it was an interesting race. Hamilton controlled the race right from the off. Verstappen managed to get up into P2 from starting from something like P6 or P7 because he had a grid penalty. I can't remember what that was for. I think it was something like ignoring yellow flags for Pierre Gasly, I believe, in Saturday qualifying. And the same applied for Valtteri Bottas. In the end, Bottas retired the race after his puncture. I think he had a problem with his car. And of course, the wise old goat of Fernando Alonso finishing on the podium again for the first time since, I want to say, 2014. Yeah, that sounds right. I think he did have a podium in 2014 before he left for Ferrari for Jadon McLaren. Yeah, the race itself was not bad. It was a good comeback drive from Sergio Perez. Tell Esteban to defend like a lion. All of that. Ocon couldn't keep Perez behind for very long in the end, but it didn't matter for Alonso, who secured the podium. So it was a decent race for sure. And now we move on to Saudi Arabia, the Jeddah Grand Prix. As soon as this was announced back in the end of 2020, I was already excited for this purely because I knew how sick the track would look, how sick it would be when I'd seen diagrams of it. To be honest, I was actually really excited for this race, especially when I saw how good this season was turning out to be. I thought Jeddah was going to be a cracker. You want my opinion? It was the best of the lot, and I'm going to say it right there. Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was absolutely insane. There was all those incidents between Hamilton and Verstappen. They touched, going over the sausage curbs, the restarts, the penalties, questioning the stewards. It was chaotic shambles at the same time. The track looked amazing. In a way, it was almost dangerous. Schumacher had that high-speed crash on lap 10, and then there was all that, pandemonium, effectively, at the restart between Perez being crashed out, George Russell, Nikita Mazepin going into the back of him as well. It was an insane race, and at the end of that, Lewis Hamilton had won 3 races in a row to go into the championship finale level on points with his nemesis Max Verstappen. I almost wondered quite a while back at something like Turkey or Russia. Imagine what it would be like if we go into the final race level on points. And well, I got my wish. It was ridiculous. It was Jeddah. It was my favourite race of the season. To be honest, it's my new favourite track that they're currently using in Formula 1, just because of how fast, how flowing it is. It's a lovely circuit. It looks sick, especially at night. Please keep it on the calendar. Yeah, I know some people might think, what the hell are you saying, Spitfire, because there's, all those issues regarding human rights in Saudi Arabia. Look, I totally agree that if we're campaigning, the whole We Race as One thing, if we're campaigning for that, then we shouldn't be racing in Jeddah. I do agree with that. However, if you put all that to one side a minute and think about the track and the racing, it's incredible. So, I'm just going to leave it at that, to be honest. And finally, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Now, yeah, this is going in very exciting. And that is purely because of one thing. The fact that most of the race between sort of lap 2 and lap 45 was boring, to be honest. It wasn't very exciting. It was kind of tense, a bit of a slow burner. Perez announcing himself as the second Minister of Defence to race in F1. The way he made his Red Bull about 3 times as wide as it should have been. And, well, he did an incredible job in keeping Hamilton behind for that long. That's one of the things that I think helped Verstappen win the championship, was the fact that he could close up to Hamilton. Obviously, that, in the end, didn't matter, as the safety car was deployed a few laps from the end. So, yeah, there was all that incident on lap 1. Hamilton got a fantastic start, especially on the harder compound of tyre than Verstappen, which was really interesting. The Red Bull not launching well at all. He got the job done. Verstappen, that very optimistic lunge down into the chicane at the end of the first DRS straight. I've already expressed my opinion on that in the video that I made on my honest opinion of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. And after that, it just was a slow burner. And then we got to Latifi's accident. And, well, that's when everything is thrown wide into the open, because the stewards were put into question. I still think the stewards handled the whole situation really poorly. I still think Michael Massey has to go. That's really harsh, I feel like. But it's just true that the race wasn't handled well in terms of the stewarding. In terms of the end result, we had 1 lap of racing to decide the whole championship, which, in a way, you could not have written that. That was just unscripted as it could ever be. It was just incredible that the entire season, all those laps of racing, all those incidents, those level on points, all on the line, came down to the wire on the last lap. Verstappen had the chance to pit. Mercedes couldn't pit Hamilton because he would lose track position. And therefore, Verstappen is the world champion of 2021. Anyway, guys, that is it. That is every single Grand Prix from this season ranked. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to like, share and subscribe. Let's get to 400 subscribers. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and join my Discord. Both links are in the description below. Merry Christmas, and I'll see you guys all next time. Goodbye.